It follows you everywhere, silent, unnamed, stretching behind you in the dusk, crouching below in the noonday sun, lengthening again as evening falls. Your shadow, you've never spoken to it, yet it's always known your shape. You've never taught it your name, but it never gets you wrong. It clings to you like a question that's never been answered. Have you ever truly looked at it? It doesn't blink when you blink. It doesn't speak when you cry. It grows large when you're small and shrinks when you stand tall. And yet, it's not you. It has no color, no depth, no substance, only the absence of light. But it feels like it belongs, doesn't it? Like some part of you slipped beneath the floor of physics and now walks alongside you as a whisper. In every culture, in every time, shadows have lingered in the background, both physically and symbolically. The Greeks once thought shadows were the souls of the dead. In Plato's cave, shadows were the only truths the prisoners ever knew. In folklore, they're omens. In childhood, they're monsters. And in our dreams, they shift, they chase, they merge with us. Sometimes they even speak. What is it about this thing that doesn't breathe, doesn't feel, and yet feels more intimate than our own face in the mirror? Maybe it's because the shadow is, in many ways, the simplest version of you, a pure silhouette, a silent outline, stripped of noise, stripped of thought, stripped of time. And so we begin this journey, not with light, but with its denial. Not with what is, but with what is left behind. Because this isn't a story about just shadows. This is a story about the layers of what we believe makes us real. And when you peel back those layers, biology, perception, memory, time, what you're left with is often something intangible. A question, a shape, a suggestion for you. That's what your shadow really is. In this journey, we'll walk together through space and psychology, through mythology and quantum fields. We'll ask how light creates darkness, how memory sculpts identity, and how absence can tell us more about reality than presence ever could. We'll touch science, but only with gentle hands. We'll explore the truth, but only if it helps you sleep better tonight. Because this is not a race for answers. This is a place to sit, to wonder, to exhale. You didn't invite your shadow. It came with the package. But maybe, just maybe, tonight, you'll begin to see it, not as a trick of physics, not as a ghost, but as a gentle mirror, the kind that only shows itself when everything else has gone quiet. You'd think a shadow is simple, a dark shape cast by something standing between light and a surface. But simplicity is often an illusion. A shadow is not a thing. It is the lack of a thing. It's not made of matter. It doesn't have temperature or taste or scent. And yet, we all agree it exists. So what, exactly, is a shadow? Let's begin where it all starts with light. Light is peculiar. It behaves like both a wave and a particle. It moves unimaginably fast, nearly 300,000 kilometers per second. But it's also delicate. It bends, it bounces, it refracts. It hesitates at the edge of glass and splits into rainbows when it meets a droplet of water. So what happens when something blocks that light? When an opaque object stands in its path, light cannot pass through. And so, behind the object, the absence is cast. The darkness, the place light could not reach, is your shadow. But the story deepens. Look closely, and you'll notice that shadows aren't uniform. There's a darker, central region, the umbra, where all light is blocked. Surrounding it is the penumbra, a softer shadow formed by partial light. When you stand in sunlight, you're not just making one shadow. You're making a gradient of darkness, sculpted by angles, distances, and sources. It's a dance between geometry and energy. Your body, the sun, the surface, each plays a part. Shift slightly, and the entire choreography changes. And what about sharpness? Some shadows have crisp edges, like silhouettes cut from black paper. Others blur into the ground like fog. This softness or sharpness depends on the size of the light source and its distance. A small, distant source like the sun casts sharper shadows than a large, nearby lamp. This is why twilight is the hour of ambiguity. When the sun dips low, shadows grow long and strange. They stretch across sidewalks like liquid no longer belonging to us but to the earth. Let's go deeper. What about color? Shadows aren't always black. In fact, under colored light, shadows can take on hues. Place a red and a green light source side by side, and your shadow splits, part red, part green, sometimes even blue. Here's the paradox. A shadow, which is the absence of light, still inherits the rules of light. Even absence must obey the physics of presence. It's like silence shaped by the language you're not speaking, or a gap shaped by the things that surround it. Now imagine this. You are standing under the sky, the sun behind you, your body in between. You stretch your arms, and your shadow grows. You crouch, and it shrinks. What's happening is not just a trick of perspective. Your shadow is tracing the angles of incoming light. It is geometry, projected. It speaks in the quiet language of vectors and absorption. It maps the shape of your resistance against the beam of photons, in a way. Your shadow is a record of your defiance. Let's now add another layer. Shadow as information. Photographers call this chiaroscuro, the interplay between light and darkness, to reveal depth and emotion. Without shadows, a face appears flat. Without contrast, a world loses texture. Painters use shadows not to obscure, but to reveal. They contour the unseen. They suggest curves, creases, and emotion. Isn't it beautiful, then, that a thing formed by absence can tell us so much? Now imagine a world with no shadows, a world where light comes from every direction equally. This is not science fiction. This is reality inside a white void room, a space used in psychological experiments. In such a room, shadows vanish. Depth becomes disorienting. Your hand feels unanchored from your arm. The floor feels neither near nor far. Shadows are not just decorative. They are spatial anchors. They tell your brain where you are in space. Without them, we drift. This brings us to a powerful realization. A shadow isn't just a byproduct of light. It's a guide. It shows us where light cannot reach. It shows us the shape of the obstruction. It gives us relief, contrast, and orientation. In that way, the shadow is a map of what is missing, and by extension, what is there. It is quite literally defined by its edges, defined by the contour of interruption. Your body says, no light cannot pass here, and the universe agrees, and it marks that moment with a silhouette. Let's pause. Let's remember something beautiful. The very first evidence of your existence was your shadow as a child. Do you remember chasing it, trying to outrun it, jumping to escape it, and laughing when you failed? The shadow is both proof and mystery. It tells us something is, but never what that something means. It is a loyal mimic, but an imperfect one. It doesn't smile when you smile. It doesn't bleed when you're cut. It merely echoes the shape, never the content. And now we arrive at a soft truth. The science of shadows teaches us something deeper than optics. It teaches us that absence can be informative, that what is hidden still matters, that what is silent still shapes. Your shadow is not a lie. It's not you, but it is you, an echo carved by light, a memory in motion. And now that we understand what it is and what it is not, we can ask the next question. Why does it affect us psychologically? Why does its presence unsettle or soothe us? And what does it reveal about the self we think we are? Because next, we leave physics behind and enter the mind. You've seen a shadow 1,000 times, and yet sometimes it unnerves you. The shape in the corner of your eye, the movement in the dark that wasn't there, the figure under the door that feels too tall to be yours. Why do shadows feel so different from other things we see? They aren't objects, they aren't sounds, they aren't threats, and yet your heart races. Why? Let's begin with the human brain. We evolved to detect contrast, the flicker of motion, the shift in light, the anomaly. Your eyes are wired for survival. When you were a child, you didn't see just shapes. You saw monsters in the closet, ghosts under the bed, eyes in the night. And the reason isn't childishness, it's biology. Your brain is constantly guessing. It predicts what should be there, then compares it to what is. This is called predictive processing. And when the shadow doesn't match the shape your brain expects, it triggers alarm. You don't see with your eyes. You see with your brain interpreting your eyes. And shadows. Shadows break the pattern. They are things that shouldn't be but are, and that makes the brain whisper, danger. But perception isn't just survival. It's also a story. We don't just interpret the world logically. We narrate it. When you see a shadow move across your wall at night, your first thought isn't always physics. It's imagination. Could it be someone? Something? You're not just seeing light distortion. You're seeing meaning. Now let's talk about fear. In low light, your amygdala, the part of the brain that processes threat, becomes more sensitive. Shadows, by nature, obscure details. Your brain hates uncertainty. It fills the unknown with your worst possibilities. A vague shape becomes a person. A flicker becomes a chase. An echo becomes a whisper. This is why we dream of shadows. Why sleep paralysis conjures dark figures. Why nightmares love silhouettes. Because the brain's first response to uncertainty is not logic. It is an emotion. But there's a softer side, too. Some people love shadows. Photographers, artists, dancers, architects. They use shadow to create intimacy, to obscure just enough, to invite attention inward. And so we discover a paradox. Shadows can both scare us and soothe us. They can hide a threat or reveal a soul. Let's explore this through memory. Have you ever noticed how nostalgia feels shadowy? We don't remember things in full light. We remember them dimly, like silhouettes on a wall. Memories don't come back in 4K. They come back in pieces. A smell, a temperature, a shape, and sometimes it processes meaning in the lack of it. In fact, studies show that people often recall the emotional tone of a scene better than the scene itself. Your brain stores contrast more than clarity. the smile that faded too quickly, the friend who left without explanation, the words someone almost said. We remember shadows, even in our relationships, not the things done, but the things undone, not the light, but the places it never reached. Now let's drift into dreams. In dreams, shadows often play a specific role. They appear as chasers, as watchers, as copies of the dreamer in Jungian psychology. This is the emergence of the shadow self, the parts of you your conscious mind has rejected. The things you fear in others may live in you, the cruelty you can't explain, the urge you deny, the version of you that lives quietly in the dark. The shadow self is not evil, it is unintegrated, it is what you have refused to become, and like your real shadow, it always follows. You can't outrun it, you can only learn from it. Let's come back to perception. Your shadow doesn't move on its own, but under flickering streetlights or passing headlights, it seems alive. And here, another psychological effect emerges, the uncanny. The uncanny is the feeling of something being almost familiar, but not quite. Your shadow looks like you, but not enough. It exaggerates, it distorts, it copies without essence. It reminds you that you are not in full control of your image, that some part of you exists outside your will. Now, imagine this. You're walking down a dim hallway. A figure passes behind you. You stop, but nothing's there. That fear of that moment of heart-racing pause comes from an ancient brain reacting to uncertainty of form. Your brain wants things to be either there or not. But shadows are in between. They live in the liminal. They are thresholds between presence and absence, self and other, known and unknown. And so, we reach an insight. Your shadow is not just perceived with your eyes. It is felt with your mind. It is a symbol, a mirror, a message. It tells you not just where the light ends, but where your certainty ends. It is the first step into doubt, into intuition, into imagination. The psychology of shadows is the psychology of edges, edges of safety, edges of identity, edges of awareness. And once you cross those edges, you begin to see not just your world differently, but yourself. Next, we go deeper. We've talked about how the mind feels shadows, but what about what it hides? What happens when the shadow becomes you? That's where we go now, to the shadow self, to the part of you that you've never invited into the light, and maybe never dared to meet. Some shadows fall behind you. Others live inside you. They don't stretch across sidewalks. Years, across memories, across the things you never say out loud. They are not made of light. They are made by you. Every denial, every hidden impulse, every feeling labeled unacceptable by the world, by your culture, by your upbringing, gets tucked away, not gone, just out of sight. Carl Jung called this the shadow self. He didn't mean it metaphorically. He meant it structurally. Your psyche, the full architecture of your mind, isn't just a spotlight of consciousness. It's a castle with forgotten rooms, and the shadow self lives in those rooms, whispering behind locked doors. From the moment you're born, you start collecting shoulds and shouldn'ts. Good children don't yell. Real men don't cry. Smart people don't get angry. Kind people don't say no. And so you split. You curate the version of you that the world wants to see, what Jung called the persona. And everything that doesn't fit that costume goes into the shadow. But here's the catch. You never get rid of those pieces. They don't disappear. They fester. they grow teeth. They develop stories of their own. And one day, they show up not in mirrors, but in moments. Moments when you snap in anger. Moments when envy burns quietly. Moments when a cruel thought flits across your mind and you're shocked it came from you. But it did, and it always could. Because that too is you. This isn't shameful, this is human. To have a shadow self doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're whole, unaware of your wholeness. Perhaps, but whole nonetheless. Jung believed the journey of life is not to eliminate the shadow, but to integrate it, to face it, name it, learn from it, not to let it drive, but to let it be heard, because what you deny will control you, and what you understand will inform you. Let's pause with a myth. In many stories, the hero must descend into darkness. In Greek myth, it's Orpheus traveling to the underworld, only to find his own face inside the mask. In every culture, the hero meets a version of themselves they never wanted to see. This is not a mistake of storytelling. This is the structure of transformation. The shadow is the trial. Jung called this process individuation. It's the journey of becoming a full person, not just what the world asked of you, but all that you are. The artist who repressed their rage finally let it out on the canvas. The leader who repressed their vulnerability finally admitted fear. The gentle one who repressed their boundaries finally saying no with conviction. When we integrate the shadow, we gain access to parts of ourselves we once feared, and with them power, not dominance, but authenticity. The shadow is not only where the bad things go, it's also where the neglected brilliance goes. The child who was told to be quiet may have locked away their voice. The girl who was told she was too much may have buried her ambition. The boy who was punished for crying may have hidden his empathy. Your shadow holds more than shame. It holds gold. Jung called it the golden shadow, the parts of us that shine but scare us because they don't fit the role we were taught to play. To meet your shadow is not just to confront darkness. It is to uncover buried light. Now, let's be honest. Facing the shadow isn't easy. You will feel resistance. You will hear your mind say, "That's not me." You will want to blame others, to run. Every overreaction, there is a message. Behind every judgment is a mirror. The person you hate may hold a part of you. The character you mock may be the one you buried. And when you dare to admit it, you begin to soften. Not into weakness, but into truth. Let's bring this home. You cannot be free while pretending. You cannot love others while hating your own reflection. You cannot find peace while waging war against your own nature. The shadow doesn't disappear in light. It disappears in integration. Only when you stop pretending it's not there does it stop haunting you. So, how do you begin? Gently, with honesty, with compassion. Ask: what am I most ashamed of? What do I criticize others most often? What emotions make me uncomfortable? What did I need to suppress to be accepted? Then listen. You may find that your shadow is not a monster, but a teacher, a protector, a younger version of you, waiting to be heard. In closing, your shadow self isn't really not you. It's the part of you you haven't yet learned to love, like the literal shadow. It follows, quiet, unseen, waiting for you to stop running. And when you do, when you finally turn around, you don't lose yourself. You find your full shape at last. Long before psychology, long before physics and relativity, humans already feared the shadow. not the absence of light, but the presence of something else. In the beginning, there were stories. Before language was written, it was spoken in whispers, around fires, in caves, under stars. And in those first stories, the shadow was never just a trick of light. It was a spirit, a soul. Start in ancient Egypt, they had a word, shut. The shut was the shadow of a person, and it was considered one of the 5 essential components of the human soul. It was you, but not you. It moved with you, yet could wander freely in death. Egyptians believed the shut lingered long after the body died, able to speak, to protect, or to haunt. A shadow wasn't a metaphor, it was a piece of the spirit. In many African cultures, especially among the Igbo of Nigeria, the shadow is seen as the chi, a guardian spirit or spiritual twin. It reflects your inner nature, your spiritual alignment, and sometimes your destiny. To lose your shadow is to lose yourself. The Aboriginal Australians hold a powerful view. A person exists in multiple layers. There's the physical self, and then the shadow soul, which travels in dreams, visions, and death. This shadow soul can be harmed, so images, especially shadows in paintings, must be treated with caution. It's more than superstition. It's protection of essence. In Philippine folklore, the aswang, a shape-shifting creature, casts no shadow. It is a way to detect the unnatural. In the absence of shadow, there is deceit. Likewise, in many Southeast Asian traditions, supernatural entities are believed to either lack shadows entirely or cast twisted ones, because the shadow, by its nature, reveals truth, and what has none hides something. Even in Christian iconography, shadows take on weight. Think of Psalm 23. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, not darkness, not death, the shadow of it, a place where death looms, where fear precedes reality. It is the anxiety of what may come, what could happen. Shadow becomes not the thing, but the fear of the thing. Let's go east now to Japan. In Shintoism, shadow and light are not opposites. They are interdependent. The famous aesthetic of Yigen, a sense of mystery and depth, comes from what is hidden. Shadows are not to be banished. They are to be respected. In no theater, performers often step into partial shadow to convey death, sorrow, or a transition to another world. The boundary between seen and unseen is sacred. Now, let's move west, back to ancient Greece. There, the eidolon was the ghostly image or shade of a person. In Homer's Odyssey, when Odysseus visits the underworld, he meets shades of souls. With no substance, they cannot be embraced. They are not ghosts, they are memories, echoes, like shadows burned onto stone. So what connects all these cultures? Across time, across geography, across belief systems, the shadow is always more than light distortion. It is the edge of being, the echo of a soul, the fear of the unseen, or the twin of the self. Let's pause on this last one, the twin. In Norse mythology, the Fylgja is a shadowy double animal or human figure that follows a person and reflects their fate. In some versions, it can be seen only in dreams. In others, it appears just before death. The idea recurs in doppelganger lore, Germanic tales of people seeing their shadow self as a warning, a curse, or a glitch in fate. And again in Haitian Vodou, where every human has a twin spirit, one that must be honored, or else illness may follow. Even in modern horror, the evil twin, the double, the shadow version, remains a staple. Why? Because we've always suspected there is more than one of us inside us. Let's turn now to the function of these myths. They aren't just stories, they are memory containers. They hold fears too large to explain and too old to forget. The fear of darkness wasn't just about predators. It was about not knowing what was watching, not knowing what you might become when no one was watching. And yet, shadows aren't always terrifying. They also show up in ritual, in ceremony, in reverence. In the Islamic tradition, the shadow is mentioned in the Quran as a sign of God's mercy. Have they not looked at their own shadows, stretching and shrinking with the sun? It is Allah who controls all things. The shadow is a symbol of the divine rhythm, rise and fall, day and night, presence and retreat. It is surrender. In Indonesian wayang, shadow puppetry, the shadows are the main event. Figures are cast against a lit screen, and audiences watch only the shadows, not the puppet itself. The philosophy behind it: we see only the shadow of reality. What lies behind it is a deeper truth we cannot fully grasp. This too echoes Plato's allegory of the cave, where prisoners mistake shadows on a wall for reality. Unaware of the world beyond. Myth becomes memory. Memory becomes metaphor. Shadows have always danced between the seen and the sensed. They carry both history and prophecy. Let's bring it forward into the modern world today. Shadows still haunt us, but now they take new forms. Data shadows, your digital footprint, emotional shadows, the trauma passed through generations, political shadows, histories erased, buried, denied. We live in shadowlands of information and identity, and sometimes what we can't see still controls what we do. To study shadow across cultures is to study what each society is afraid to confront. In some, it is death. In others, it is identity. In others still, it is the divine. But all agree: to lose one's shadow is to lose anchorage, because a shadow proves you exist. It proves you stand in light. As we step out of myth and into memory, ask yourself, what shadows have your ancestors passed down to you? What fears, what silences, what names were never spoken? What part of you remembers stories you were never told? These too are shadows, living in your mind, whispering through your bloodline, and like the myths, they want to be seen. You don't need light to cast a shadow. Sometimes just existing is enough. Every footprint we've ever made on this planet, every fire, every city, every breath of carbon has left something behind, a trace, a signal, a mark in the memory of Earth. This is not the kind of shadow that follows you. This is the kind you leave behind. The Anthropocene, our planet's new story. There's a term for this era we live in: the Anthropocene. It means the age of humans, but its real meaning, the age of our shadow. Geologists are now considering marking this epoch with the radioactive particles left by 20th century nuclear tests. Tiny traces that settled in soil, glaciers, and oceans, found everywhere on Earth, yet etched into stone and ice for thousands of years. We've become not just part of Earth's story, we've started writing it in plastics, in toxins, in species gone silent. Our presence is no longer neutral. It is permanent. The carbon ghost sleds pause and talk about carbon, the invisible ink of our shadow. Fossil fuels are often described as natural resources, but that word hides something. They are ancient life, turned into energy. Coal is carbonized swamp forests. Oil is prehistoric algae and marine bacteria. Gas is trapped sunlight, compressed by time. When we burn them, we don't just release energy, we release ghosts, trapped. Inside every barrel of oil is a billion-year-old breath, and now we've released so many of those breaths into the sky that the planet is warming. The seas are rising, and the atmosphere is changing. It is a breath we cannot take back, a shadow that will last for centuries. The shadow of extinction. We often talk about species going extinct as if they just disappear, but extinction doesn't vanish. It echoes. When a bird species is silenced, the forest it once shaped begins to change. Seeds go undispersed, insect populations shift, entire ecosystems wobble. Remove one thread from the web, and you don't just lose a creature, you lose a rhythm. Extinction is not just the absence of life, it is the distortion of memory. The dodo, the thylacine, the passenger pigeon, the Steller's sea cow. These are not just stories of animals, they are shadows cast by our desire for food, for novelty, for domination, and many of these creatures never met an entire generation of humans. That's how fast it can happen. The earth doesn't forget, it just absorbs. The silence, industrial shadows, cities that breathe smokestack in any old industrial town. And the air will still tell you something. Factories long abandoned, warehouses rusting, but the ground, still soaked in chemicals, the water, still whispers of lead. And oil.t's are environmental shadows, leftovers of progress. In Chernobyl, the explosion lasted only a moment, but the radiation will haunt the soil for 20,000 years. In Minamata, Japan, a single chemical company poisoned the bay with mercury in the 1950s, and the children were born with deformities for decades. Progress without reflection casts a long shadow. It is not a condemnation. It is a reminder. What we build, we carry. What we extract, we owe. Whether with a memory, a storm is not just wind and water. It is a pattern, and lately the patterns have changed. More heat, more evaporation, more chaos. What were once 100-year floods now arrive every few years. Wildfires rage hotter, faster, longer. Droughts stretch like shadows over entire continents. The earth is reacting. It remembers the carbon. It remembers the extraction. It remembers the imbalance. And just like our psychological shadows, what we don't face returns. Sometimes as a hurricane. Sometimes as a famine. Sometimes as an empty well. Climate grief. The shadow we carry inside there is a word for the sorrow people feel when they see their world change. Nostalgia. The homesickness for a place that still exists but no longer feels the same. It's when the lake you swam in as a child dries to a cracked basin, when the birds that once signaled spring no longer return, when winters are too warm and summers are too loud. This is not just loss, it's a betrayal of memory. For the first time in human history, the future feels shorter than the past. Not because we lack time, but because we've disrupted its natural rhythm. Climate grief is not just reserved for environmentalists. It lives in farmers who can no longer predict the rain, in children who inherit anxiety alongside education, in scientists who measure collapse by the gigaton. The planet is not just warming, it is mourning, and so are we. Geological memory. The earth writes back beneath our feet. The earth is constantly writing, in layers of sediment, in rings of coral, in the trapped gas of glaciers. These are the fossils of a language change written in minerals and ice. Every eruption, every extinction, every chemical shift, it's all there, and now we've entered the record. Plastic microfibers are found in the deepest ocean trenches. Radionuclides rest in Arctic permafrost. Concrete, steel, and aluminum now weigh more than all living biomass on Earth. Think about that. The human-made world outweighs the natural one. We are no longer just a species. We are a force of geology. We are leaving behind not footprints, but strata. Restoration, learning to cast softer shadows, said, shadows do not exist without light, and the same hands that dug, burned, and fractured can also plant, clean, and heal. There is a new generation of scientists, farmers, artists, and elders who are reweaving the fabric we've torn. Indigenous forest restoration in the Amazon, coral farming to rebuild reefs in the Maldives, urban beekeeping and rooftop gardens in Berlin, Tokyo, and Nairobi, legal movements to grant rivers and forests personhood rights. These are not acts of nostalgia. They are acts of memory. We remember how to live with the land. Absorbs, adapts, adjusts, but it also reacts. In physics, there's feedback. In biology, there's resistance. In ecosystems, there's tipping points, and we are approaching many. Permafrost thaw could release methane at massive scales. Ocean currents may shift, altering global climate zones. Rainforests may flip from carbon sinks to carbon sources. The Earth does not rage. It doesn't punish. It simply responds. And in that response, our shadow becomes visible, not as metaphor, but as a storm, flood, heat, drought, disease, collapse. Full circle, the shadow and the mirror. Let's pause, take a step back, because what we're really exploring here is not just environmental, it's existential. We are a species that forgets. It remembers, and its memory becomes our future. If a shadow is the echo of our shape in light, then the Earth's shadow is the echo of our choices. What we plant, what we burn, what we value, what we ignore, all of it leaves residue, not just in air or soil, but in consequences. A final thought: when ancient people feared shadows, they weren't wrong. They intuited what we now prove through data, that something unseen can shape what is. They saw the spirit in the land, the memory in the mountain, the warning in the wind. Maybe it's time we listen again, not just to satellites and graphs, but to the silence of extinct forests, the hunger in dry rivers, the tired breath of the sky, and perhaps to the question every shadow asks: are you aware of what you leave behind? Because even if we disappear, our shadows will not. When ancient people feared their shadows, it wasn't just superstition. They sensed something deeper, that what trails behind us, unseen and unspoken, might say more about us than what stands in the light. That fear didn't fade, it evolved. Today, we live surrounded by light, artificial, constant, digital. And yet, shadows persist. But now, they don't cling to the soles of our feet. They live in servers, in subconscious patterns, in forgotten memories and predictive code. You're not followed by just one shadow anymore. You carry many, and some of them know you better than you know yourself. The first shadow, the one inside, let's begin where all shadows believed every human being carried a shadow self, the hidden part of Our psyche we disown or ignore. It's made of everything we repress, the things we're ashamed of, the traits we deny, the feelings we avoid. If your conscious mind is the curated self, the one you show the world, then your shadow is the opposite. It's messy, honest, primitive, and it never sleeps. You can ignore it, you can deny it, but it will still shape your behavior, from the words you blurt out in anger to the dreams you don't understand. It whispers through anxiety. It shouts through projection. It lives in jealousy, in spite, in secrets. But Jung didn't see the shadow as evil. He saw it as integral. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In other words, the more unaware you are of your shadow, the more power it has. And this brings us to the modern dilemma, because now we don't just hide parts of ourselves. We outsource them. The second shadow, the digital double. Every time you go online, you watch every hesitation, every search. It's not just content, it's data. And data doesn't forget. Across social platforms, search engines, and recommendation systems, that data is being gathered, organized, analyzed, until it forms something uncanny, a digital double, a ghost made of code, preferences, and probabilities. It doesn't have a voice, but it speaks for you. It doesn't have a face, but it's used to recognize yours. This version of you is scattered across the cloud. Advertisers use it. Governments monitor it. What jobs you're offered, what risks you're flagged for. It can outlive you. It can act without your knowledge. And if you're not careful, it can become more you than you are. Memory, the shadow of time. But shadows don't only follow bodies, they follow memories. And memory is fragile. Neuroscience has shown that memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time you recall a moment, your brain reshapes it slightly, like a painter touching up an old canvas dot. Eventually, you're remembering the memory of a memory. But what happens when you combine that instability with the permanence of digital storage? What happens when your most vulnerable thoughts are captured in tweets? When your teenage opinions live forever on a public timeline? When your mistakes are screenshot and re-uploaded by strangers? We used to forget as a mercy. Now, forgetting feels like a glitch. The internet remembers, even if we don't want it to. Our past selves, confused, angry, immature, become fossils, not of who we are, but of who we once were, frozen in pixel form. And our digital shadow stretches further with every year. It carries versions of us we no longer recognize, but can never delete. Surveillance and the shadow state now. Let's go deeper, because your digital shadow isn't just for sale. It's under surveillance. Governments and corporations alike harvest metadata, not necessarily what you said, but who you said it to, when, and how often. Patterns, relationships, behavior. These are used to predict threats, profile tendencies, and assign invisible scores. In China, the social credit system monitors everything from bill payments to jaywalking, shaping citizens' access to jobs, loans, and travel. In the US and beyond, predictive policing tools use algorithms trained on biased data to patrol high-risk neighborhoods, perpetuating injustice in the name of statistics. Your shadow isn't just following you, it's following others, reflecting onto them, reinforcing cycles. What began as reflection became reinforcement. And when we stop questioning it, the shadow starts making the rules. Algorithms and echoes, social media doesn't show you the world. It shows you a mirror, and not even a clean one, a warped, filtered, optimized one. What you engage with, you see more of. What you pause on, the algorithm notes. It learns your fears, your hopes, your shame, to exploit them. The result: addictive scrolling, increased polarization, constant comparison, decreased self-esteem. You're not just seeing content, you're seeing your shadow amplified and gamified, and you begin to behave in response to it. You become more reactive, more defensive, less whole. You're not choosing what you want. We've built tools that reflect us, but not honestly. We've created identities online, but ones that require constant maintenance. We are performing versions of ourselves, curated, filtered, performative, even as our real selves grow quieter. And somewhere beneath the likes, the metrics, the digital noise is a question: do I recognize the person I've become? Because if your shadow has become a simulation, if your identity is built on reaction and reflection, if you can no longer tell the difference between your desires and your programming, then maybe your shadow isn't just following you. Maybe it's leading reclaiming the shadow. But there is a way forward. Just like Jung taught, we must face the shadow. We must acknowledge the parts of ourselves we've avoided, the contradictions, the regrets, the complexities. We must stop curating and start integrating. What does this mean? It means stepping away from constant exposure and toward inner dialogue. It means noticing when you react emotionally to content and asking why. It means creating space for ambiguity and resisting the urge to present a perfect version of yourself. It means recognizing that the shadow, digital or psychological, is not an enemy. It is an invitation to wholeness, to tell the truth, to authenticity. Digital death, real life. One final thought: when you die, your shadow might live on, not just in memory, but in metadata. There are already services that turn your chat logs into chatbots, that recreates your voice using AI, that simulates your personality for your descendants. You could become a ghost in the machine. In a world where nothing is forgotten, what does it mean to truly let go? The light behind the shadow in the end. A shadow only exists because there is light, and while it's tempting to run from it, or to hide in the glow of screens, maybe the answer is simpler. Maybe we don't need to escape the shadow. We need to understand it, to walk alongside it. Reflection, not a simulation of self, but a human fully seen. Every civilization has stared into the dark and wondered, what lives in the shadows? Not the ones under trees or behind stones, but the ones at the edge of thought. The ones that flicker just beyond understanding. The ones that feel alive. We are not the first to ask. From the first cave drawings to the stained glass of cathedrals, from firelight rituals to glowing pixels on a screen, we have always told stories about the shadows, because the shadow is where we placed everything we couldn't explain, everything that frightened us, everything that awed us. And in doing so, we made meaning. We built gods, we conjured monsters, we painted worlds within worlds. This section is about those creations, about how the imagination used the shadow, not just as metaphor, but as a map of the invisible shadows, as portals to the divine in ancient cultures. The shadow was not just absent, it was a presence. In Egyptian mythology, the shut was the shadow self, a vital spiritual component of a person. To harm someone's shadow was to harm their soul. It was protected in tombs, preserved in art. The afterlife. In Hinduism, the deity Chaya literally means shadow. She is the shadow wife of Surya, the sun god, born when his real wife could no longer stand his brilliance. Think about that. Even the gods had shadows. Even the sun required contrast. In Christianity, shadow often appears as paradox. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, here, the shadow is not evil. It is the setting of transformation. To pass through shadow is to encounter something holy. These ancient stories were not naive. They understood something we often forget, that mystery is sacred, and that the unknown isn't empty, it's full of gods, full of fears. They were hungry across time and geography. Humans have filled the dark with creatures. In Japan, the Kajana, a woman-shaped shadow that appears without a body, bringing misfortune. In Arabic folklore, the jinn, beings made of smokeless fire, who dwell in shadowed places. Between dimensions, in Europe, the shadow people, dark, fast-moving shapes seen out of the corner of the eye. Shapeshifters who live in the periphery of reality, abducting children and confusing travelers. In West African tradition, the Ads, a vampiric being that lives in shadows and can slip through cracks in walls. Why do we invent these things? Because we needed a name for the unease. Because sometimes fear demands a face. And because shadows, by definition, can't be caught. They move when you move. They vanish when you confront them. So we imagine them as things that could watch us, chase us, possess us. But here's the deeper truth. Every monster we invent is an echo of ourselves. The shadow becomes monstrous, not when we see it, but when we pretend it isn't there. Art, as shadow-making artists, have always understood this. They work in contrast, in depth, in negative space. In fact, the very word chiaroscuro, in painting made famous during the Renaissance, means light-dark. It is the manipulation of shadow that gives an image life. Look at Caravaggio's violent contrasts, Rembrandt's smoky faces, the way Van Gogh made night alive with motion and depth. They used it, even in sculpture. Shadow is what defines form. It carves out the illusion of weight, of softness, of distance. In cinema, too, the shadow plays a leading role, from German expressionist films like Nosferatu, where jagged silhouettes terrified audiences, to the noir genre, where every moral ambiguity was wrapped in smoke and silhouette, to modern horror, where what's not shown is often more frightening than what is. We return again and again to the space between clarity. Shadow becomes emotion. Absence becomes presence, and the audience feels it, even if they can't explain why. Shadow archetypes and the collective imagination. Psychologically, myths aren't just stories. They are shared dreams. Carl Jung believed in the collective unconscious, a realm of inherited symbols and archetypes that humanity shares. One of the most powerful of these is the shadow archetype, that this is the part of the psyche that contains the parts of ourselves we repress, not just personally, but culturally. In myths, it appears as the antagonist, the dark twin, the cave, the dragon, the mirror. Think of Loki in Norse myth, is always dancing between order and chaos. Anansi, the African spider god, a weaver of stories and lies. The Minotaur, lurking in the labyrinth, half man, half beast. Ravenna in Hindu epics, is a demon king with knowledge and power, but ruled by desire. Satan, in Christian tradition, is not just evil, but the accuser, the tester, the questioner. These figures aren't just villains, they are reflections. They hold up a distorted mirror to the hero, forcing them to confront what they might become, and in doing so, they push the story forward. The myth cannot evolve without the shadow, because we cannot evolve without it. Folklore, as social memory folklore, is the grandmother of myth. Less about gods, more about people, but just as saturated with shadow. Think of how many stories begin with a warning. Don't go into the woods. Don't stray from the path. Don't speak to strangers. Don't follow the shadow. These aren't just cautionary tales, preserved through metaphor and carried in song, tale, and rhyme. For example, in Slavic folklore, the Baba Yaga lives in a hut with chicken legs deep in the forest. She can help you or eat you. She's not evil, she's ambiguous. A test of intention in German tales. Peter Schlemiel sells his shadow for a bottomless purse and finds that without it, he is no longer fully human. In African stories, the trickster hare or spider outwits enemies through cleverness, blurring the line between right and wrong. In Caribbean tales, Duppy's malevolent spirits linger in shadows, punishing those who break taboos. Folklore doesn't lecture, it echoes. It tells us, you are not the first to feel this fear and the shadow. It becomes the stage upon which transformation is tested. The unknown is not empty today. We pretend we've mapped the world. We have satellites, street view, augmented reality, night vision, LIDAR. We know where everything is, and yet we fear the deep sea. We feel uneasy in basements. We pause at the edge of forests at dusk. We see patterns in static, in mirrors, in dreams. Why? Because no matter how much we know, the unknown remains, and our imaginations reach out to meet it. This isn't a weakness, it's a gift. The shadow gives us permission to wonder, to invent, to reach beyond what can be proved. It is the birthplace of stories, the echo chamber of dreams, the dark room of creativity. Without shadow, nothing would stand out. Without mystery, there is no art. The unknown is not a void, it is a womb, closing the circle. So, what is a shadow, really? A flicker, a metaphor, a myth, a warning, a mirror. It is what we do not want to see made visible. It is the cost of the light. It is the companion of consciousness, from cave walls to computer screens, from bedtime tales to sacred texts, from the gods we worship to the fears we whisper. We've always needed the shadow, because through it we confront what we are not, glimpse what we might become. And maybe that's the deepest truth of all. The shadow is not the enemy. It is an invitation to emerge changed. Civilizations are built on foundations. We can see stone, steel, symbols, laws, but they are also shaped by things we don't see, by what is hidden, forbidden, whispered, by what lies in shadow. From ancient temples to modern cityscapes, from religious rites to bureaucratic silence, the shadow runs beneath it all, not as an accident, but as design. This is the story of how civilizations use shadow, how power thrives not just in light, but in the careful manipulation of darkness. Shadows cast by stone architecture as authorities step into a cathedral, or a mosque, or an ancient temple. Notice what happens. Your voice lowers. Your posture changes. You become small. This is not by chance. Architecture has always been a language of control, and shadow is one of its most fluent words. Take the pyramids of Egypt, massive structures built with precise astronomical alignment, casting shadows that moved with the heavens. They weren't just tombs, they were cosmic clocks, statements of eternal order, or the temples of Angkor Wat, reinforcing divine narratives with celestial choreography. In Gothic Europe, cathedrals rose like mountains full of stained glass and sharp arches, casting intricate shadows that danced like spirits. These shadows weren't imperfections. They were the language of mystery. They created awe. They demanded reverence. They made you feel watched. Modern power does the same with cold lobbies, marble silence, and one-way mirrors. A courtroom, a parliament, a military base, each designed to remind you this is not your space. The shadow is institutionalized. It becomes structured, and structure becomes power. Asterisk rituals in the dark, when shadow becomes sacred. But it's not just buildings. It's a ritual. Throughout history, the most sacred acts, the rites of passage, the ceremonies of birth, death, marriage, initiation, were often done in partial light, in caves, at dusk, by fire, by candlelight, because shadow invites transformation. It separates ordinary time from sacred time. In the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, initiates entered a dark chamber to witness unspeakable truths, their experience, forever sealed in secrecy. In indigenous Australian traditions, the Dreamtime stories, creation myths passed down through generations, are often performed at night, with firelight casting shadows across sacred rock. In Japan's Shinto shrines, the inner sanctum is often veiled. Shadows conceal the most holy object. You don't see God, you feel it. And in Christianity, the Easter Vigil begins in darkness, a single flame piercing the void. Light returns, yes, but only after the dark has been honored. Shadow here is not evil, it is a threshold. A place where you are unmade, so you can be remade. Civilizations understood this, that real change requires mystery, and mystery requires shadow. The hidden structures, bureaucracy, silence, and social control. Not all shadows are sacred. Some are strategic. Bureaucracies know this well. Think about how power hides in classified files, in fine print, in procedures no one understands, in surveillance that watches but is never seen. This is a structural shadow, a government that censors, a corporation that obfuscates, a system that lets you vote but not decide. These don't just use light, they weaponize shadow. They make the rules invisible. They bury the cost. They erase the fingerprints. It's no accident that the term shadow government exists, or black ops, or dark money, or ghost employees, or in the shadows of history. Civilization advances, yes, but so does opacity. And sometimes, the most effective power is the one you don't even notice. The taboo civilizational shadows of the self. Every culture defines itself as much by what it excludes as by what it celebrates. These exclusions are taboos, and they are civilization's most personal shadows. Topics we do not name, desires we do not express, histories we do not teach, griefs we do not mourn. In Victorian England, sexuality was shadowed behind etiquette. In many Eastern societies, mental illness still lives in shadow, spoken of in hushed tones, if at all. In colonial regimes, entire languages were erased, relegating identity itself to silence. and in modern societies, in horror films, in conspiracy theories, in art, in underground movements, because the more tightly civilization represses, the louder the shadow whispers. And sometimes civilizations fall, not because of what they built, but because of what they refused to see. The archive and the erasure. Memory as a shadow battle. History is not neutral. It is curated, shaped, lit from specific angles. What we remember, what we enshrine in textbooks, museums, monuments, is always a decision. And every archive has a shadow. Think of the missing voices of indigenous people in colonial records, the erased histories of enslaved populations, the forgotten labor behind great civilizations, the stories that were never written because the writers were never allowed to exist. Civilizations cast shadows, not just in space, but in time. A city may fall, but its shadow remains in ruins, in legend, in scars on the land. And sometimes the only record of what was lost is the silence it left behind. The shadow as compass. Yet the shadow doesn't just hide, it reveals. Architects know this, rich know this, rebels know this, because the shadow isn't just an obstacle, it's a signal. A badly lit street tells you where danger lies. A buried memory tells you what needs healing. To read a civilization properly, you don't just look at its buildings, you look at what they face away from. The temple's inner sanctum, the wall the monument doesn't mention. The graveyard was paved over, the people not allowed in the archive. These are not accidents. They are maps, and if you follow the shadows long enough, you find the truths that were never meant to be found. When the shadow becomes the city in our age, the shadow is no longer symbolic, but also exclusion. Cities where gentrification pushes communities into literal and figurative shadow. Prisons, entire institutions built on making people invisible. This is the shadow of infrastructure. Shadow as design. Shadow as policy. But there's another kind too. The alley where graffiti blooms. The underground theater that tells forbidden stories. The late-night gathering that births new movements. These shadows are not imposed. They are chosen. They are where resistance grows, because when the surface becomes too smooth, too scripted, too bright, we return to the cracks, and the cracks become shelter. Then culture, then revolution. The ritual of light requires darkness. Civilization, like a candle, defines itself by what it illuminates. But the flame means nothing without the darkness around it. Temples cast long shadows. Statues outlive their stories. Laws get rewritten. And yet people gather in small rooms. They whisper. They remember. They build again. Maybe civilization's greatest achievement, attached, earthly. But today, our shadows are everywhere. They exist in servers, in networks, in search results. They remember what we forget, and sometimes they know us better than we know ourselves. This is the story of our digital shadows, the invisible versions of us scattered across the internet, and what happens when machines begin to shape, manipulate, and even resurrect them. Is not science fiction. It is the present, unfolding rapidly, and it might be the most permanent shadow we've ever cast. Shadow traces. Every click is a memory. Every time you search, every time you scroll, every pause, tap, hesitation, you're leaving behind a trace, a digital footprint. But it's not just the visible data, like photos, messages, or posts. It's the invisible trails, how long you hover, what you ignore, What makes you stop? These micro-behaviors are aggregated, patterned, analyzed. They form a version of you, a profile, a simulation, a shadow self. It knows when you're sad. It knows when you're tired. It knows when you're most likely to click by now, and it doesn't forget. Even when you do. This is shadow memory without decay, a record that outlasts the moment, and maybe outlasts the person. The self in code, identity as simulation. In ancient times, identity was tied to place, to your village, your kin, your face. Today, identity floats. It's distributed, fragmented across apps, servers, and databases. What you say on one platform may contradict what you show on another, but together they form something cohesive, a mosaic, a digital ghost. Your playlists, your location history, your choice of emojis. These things don't just reflect you, they begin to define you. Even employers, governments, the conversation matters less than your engagement rate. You become what the machine thinks you are, even if you disagree. The ghost in the feed, AI, and the mimicry of mind. Then there is artificial intelligence, not just as a tool, but as a mirror. AI systems are trained on data, and your shadow is part of that training. Your voice, your writing, your art. When an AI mimics a writer or resurrects a dead actor's voice, it is pulling from the digital remains of that person. The ghost is not poetic, it is statistical, but that doesn't make it less powerful. Now imagine this: you die, but your shadow doesn't. Your texts, videos, tone, and opinions are fed into a generative model. Your loved ones can still talk to you. It's already happening. Digital immortality startups are working on legacy bots that mimic deceased people for grief therapy, nostalgia, or companionship. What starts as comfort may end in uncanny dependence. When does a shadow stop being a memory and start being a replacement? The black box shadow without explanation. Here's the danger. Most of these digital systems, the ones shaping your shadow, are black boxes. You don't know what data they use. You don't know how decisions are made. You don't know who else is watching. AI doesn't just reflect bias. It can amplify it, hard-coding it into predictions and outcomes. Shadow becomes judgment. Who gets a loan? Who gets flagged by the police? Who gets promoted? Not based on you, but based on your digital resemblance to someone else in some data set from somewhere you've never been. And there's no appeal process, because the machine doesn't explain. The ghost doesn't talk back. Privacy and erasure, the illusion of control. We believe we can delete things, unfriend, deactivate, wipe the search history, but deletion in the digital age is often a performance. Your data is cached, copied, sold, stored in places you'll never find, and even if you erase it, someone else may have saved it, screenshotted it, scraped it. Your shadow is not yours anymore. It's communal, commercial, contested. This leads to a strange paradox. The more we try to be ourselves, the more we become the property of platforms. You don't own your photos. You license them. You don't control your reach. The algorithm does. And your shadow is always WATCHABLE. Memory without emotion. When shadows lie, human memory is flawed. We forget, we misremember, we reinterpret. But that's also what makes memory human. It grows with us. It is forgiving. It blurs. Digital memory doesn't. It remembers everything exactly which means your shadow can trap you in past versions of yourself. An old tweet, an outdated opinion, a mistaken photo, frozen in time, stripped of context, used as evidence against a person you no longer are. Memory without mercy is not memory. It is surveillance. Your digital shadow has no nuance, no grief, no growth, and yet the world treats it as truth. The global shadow, when the world becomes the machine. Influence and control. Corporations monitor billions of lives in real time. Governments, trade, surveillance tech like oil, prediction markets try to guess your next move before you make it. The shadow becomes economic currency, the new oil, the new weapon, the new leash. Asterisk. Entire nations rise and fall based on whose shadows they can see and whose they can't. Shadow diplomacy, shadow warfare, shadow citizenship. You might live in one country but be governed by another's algorithm. Your decisions might be free, but your choices were already shaped by data you'll never see. This is not science fiction. This is the invisible empire you already live inside. The inner self versus the digital self. So where are you in all this? Who are you if your digital shadow walks ahead of you? If your memories live longer online than in your mind, do you still own your story? The ancients believed the shadow was the soul's twin, a double that followed you in death. Now, our shadows don't wait for death. They walk beside us in life, correcting us, predicting us, haunting us, but also possibly guiding us. Because if we can see our shadow, understand how it forms, how it deceives, how it persists, then maybe we can become more than that. We can use the machine without becoming a machine. We can remember what it means to forget, to heal, to be human. The final shadow. One day, someone will search your name and find something you forgot you ever made. A comment, a video, a thought. That fragment will be all they know. Your shadow will speak for you. Will it speak truth? Will it tell your story? Or will it tell the story the machine wants to hear? In the end, the question isn't whether the ghost in the machine exists. The question is, whose ghost is it? If this story made you pause, wonder, or even shiver just a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more journeys into the unknown. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, keep watching, keep wondering, and let time surprise you.